Okay. I just wanted to state for the record that my name is Molly-Loetterle and I'm interviewing Carol-Loetterle. We are in Hastings, Nebraska, and today's date is Sunday, November 26th, 2017. Okay, so we're going to start the personal background. So when and where were you born?
Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, August 31st, 1947.
Okay, and what were your parents' names?
Joyce Hal Miller and Stanley Ashworth Miller.
And what were their occupations?
They were an office accountant and an elementary school cafeteria manager.
Okay. How many siblings do you have?
5.
Okay. And what are their names?
3 brothers and 2 sisters. Roger is older than I'm second. Alan is next. David, he is deceased. And then Lorna and Jeanette.
So I knew their names. Okay. When was your husband born?
February 3rd, 1940.
Okay. When did you get married?
January 17th, 1968.
And then, how long was he in the military?
20 years.
20 years. Where was he stationed?
By the time I met him and we were married, he had just come back from his first tour of Vietnam. And then he was stationed in Pennsylvania at the Warminster Naval Air Station. And then he went back to Vietnam. And when he came back from Vietnam, we were stationed at the Naval Air Station in Memphis. He had been in Okinawa and Korea and Japan and Vietnam and Thailand and Taiwan, and he'd been and then California at El Toro. He'd been all over the place for 11 years by the time I met him.
What was your job and what were you doing when
I met him?
When he was in.
When he was gone, I was home with my 2 sons. I did not work while he was in the military.
Mm-hmm. And what was your living situation at the time?
Well, John and Josh were born when he was stationed at the Naval Air Station in Warminster, Pennsylvania. And then, and we lived off base. There was no base housing. We lived off base in an apartment and then had a mobile home. And then when he went back to Vietnam the second time, my younger son was 6 months old. And he moved us to Fairbury, Nebraska, into a little house there across the street from his parents while he was in Vietnam. And when he came back, then we lived in base housing in Memphis.
How'd you feel about the Vietnam War, while he was there?
I don't know whether there's a word to describe it. It was very unsettling and frustrating because you never knew from day to day what was happening. And I had no idea you can't plan anything. You just have to kind of live from day to day because you hope not to expect the worst, but he was stationed on the Da Nang Air Base. And they shot rockets in there day and night, and it was, you just hoped that they didn't bomb the base and that he was going to get to come home. But it was just very unsettling, very frustrating.
What did you know, overall about the war, at the time?
Not much, other than everybody seemed to be disgusted that we were even involved in it. Mm-hmm. All we saw on the news and everything was about Jane Fonda was upset with, that we were over there and she was an activist and I guess nobody could figure out what we were even doing there, why our men had to be over there, and I guess that was all we knew was that we were trying to help the Vietnamese people and keep them from having to live under communist dictatorship rule.
Mm-hmm. Like, what years was he deployed? Like,
he went the first time at the end of '66 and came back in December of '67, and then he went back in August of '70 and came back in May of June of '71.
Mm-hmm. How was he, like, after he came back? Like, was he different at all?
I think he was relieved to be back, but it's a whole different lifestyle when you're living over there,
mm-hmm.
By yourself. They lived in little hooches. They called them hooches. Look like little huts. And they were house mouse women, Vietnamese women. They called their house mice that came in and out and cleaned for them. And these women chewed betel nut, if you know what that is. It's a drug that they seem to be able to just live on over there. But I think he just seemed very unsettled and depressed. Not really. You don't really know what to do with yourself when you come back from living 24 hours a day under that kind of stress and strain, and with war going on. And they had to be, well, a lot of time I think they were working probably 20 hours out of every 24 hours. They were on the planes trying to keep them up in the air. That was his job. He was an aviation electrician on the A4 Skyhawks. And so they had to keep them ready to go at all times. So then when you come home, it's like walking into another world.
And, like, obviously you were, like, relieved that he was back, but, like, how did, like, other people, like, react to, like,
well, his family, we were around his family. When he came back, we were in Fairbury, where he is from, and of course his family were around, and so that was good. His mom and his dad and his sister. And so, that was fine, but, and I think, the people in a small town like that knew him and knew his family, so, it was okay. We were not in a large metropolitan area where there were people protesting the war, doing that kind of thing. We didn't have that in Fairbury. But then we left and went to Memphis, and we lived on the base. So the boys and I really didn't see any of that going on. And Harry he was not a talker, for one thing. So what went on the base and what he heard in the hangar and what they heard, out in town, or when he was sitting at the staff club, with the guys and stuff, I didn't hear much of that, And I didn't ask him. I was busy with the two guys, with the two little boys. So,
in what ways would you say the war changed your life?
Oh, well,
yeah,
I guess. Because after we were married, he wasn't gone. He wasn't gone that long. He was only gone the one time after. When my younger son was 6 months old, he left and went back, and I think it took its toll emotionally, because I was a single parent, and then when he came back, he had to be even. I mean, the war still went on, and he came back, and he still had to. His main job was training reserves how to fix these planes on the base, and so. He still was gone. So it really didn't make it. When you're a military family, you live, it's a whole different world than civilian.
Yeah.
And you know that these guys are going to be on the base and and they could get called up anytime. He could have had to go back again. He didn't. But you just never know. You kind of just go from day to day, and it changed when he did come back then and didn't have to go back. Most of his buddies and most of the Marines and Navy fellows that he hung around with spent a lot of time at the staff club. And so that meant when they weren't in the hangar working on the planes, their military life was at the staff club, sitting and drinking beer and playing cards and darts and so forth. And so if you're a military wife, there are very few that I saw military men that were home at on any regular hours. So you don't have, I guess, what most people would call a traditional family life at home. You just don't have that. And especially in wartime, because they didn't know from one day to the next either what they were going to be doing. So it's just, your whole life is just kind of up in the air.
Mm-hmm. What would you say is the best and the worst thing that happened, like, during that time?
While he was gone, or just from the time? The best things after we met was when I had my older son and then the younger son. They were just 14 months apart, and we did get to have them both around my family back in Pennsylvania. They were both born there. And then when he went back to Vietnam, we did get to spend that year then with his folks, who were elderly at the time. He was the youngest of 4 kids, and so we did get to spend time around his parents while the 2 boys were little. They got to spend time around his parents, and but the worst thing was not having any money. I had no idea. He had to leave so quickly, got called up and went so quickly that we didn't have time to set up any financial arrangements, and so I had to wait for mail to come, for money to come to even pay our rent and pay our bills, and so until he could have a period of time to get it to me. So once again, it just kind of you worried about paying bills for one thing.
And so, like, what did your, like, friends or, like, neighbors think about the war? Or, like,
most of the only ones I guess my one next door neighbor there on Bay. Well, and then we lived in 2 different base housing, and the one was the one mother that lived right next door to us. She seemed really settled, and it didn't seem to really bother her too much. And her husband was there. He had not been during that wartime. Mike had not been to Vietnam. He was there on the Naval Air Station, and I think he was a warrant officer. So it didn't seem to be bothering them. They had a couple of little kids. But then when we moved to the other housing, the one fellow was a Marine, lived at one side of us, and he was always very upset with the way they were being treated and the way when they came back, they weren't. I guess they expected better treatment, or they expected to be moved up in pay grades, but that didn't happen during the war. And so I think that most of them, just as I said, seemed to feel like it was, what are we doing? Are we really making a difference in anything, or are we just over there losing our guys, and a lot of them not getting to come home.
Yeah. So, like, all your neighbors were, like, military people then? So they all had people in the military?
Navy and Marines. I was not around Air Force because we were at the largest inland Navy base in the world. So.
How'd you feel about LBJ and his presidency during the time.
We mostly just how would you feel about it? Because nobody seemed to really know what they were doing or why. And he didn't either. It didn't seem, I guess most of the time we just thought, here we go again. Why are they, but we didn't understand all the political stuff that was going on in Washington either. We didn't understand, we were not, and we weren't officers or anything. So we weren't in on all of the nitty gritty bureaucratic and political things that were, so, basically all we heard was what came over the TV and what we didn't. And the military guys just laughed and said, the president really didn't have much idea what was going on.
Yeah. How did you feel about, what he did with the war and, his actions, concerning the war? Did you agree or, disagree with what he was doing?
I don't know. I guess we just kind of felt like, why doesn't he just, no, I didn't agree with, and those that I spoke with at that time did not agree with him sending more of our troops over there and having the guys go back and forth, 2 or 3 different times. But then again, I guess that's upsetting because it's your family, because it's but we didn't understand either all of the ramifications as to, well, what was going to happen if we didn't? Because we weren't looking at it from the military standpoint. Most of the women that I were around were wives and mothers of these military men, and of course we wanted them home. And but at the same time, we'd see pictures and even my husband sent home boxes of pictures that he took over there. At that time, you used a camera, and sent home rolls and rolls of pictures of people over there, and you couldn't help but feel sorry for them because they didn't have anything, and their people were all being killed. But our guys were trying to help them, and were trying to, they'd run into the villages and grab the kids out and try to save lives, so they didn't. But what could you do? When the bombers came over, when the rockets flew into the bunkers and stuff that on the base, we didn't have any choice but to fight back.
Yeah. And
so I guess, what can you say? The president did what he thought was the best thing to do.
And was he ever hurt when he went over there? No,
he was not injured. No.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Other than the stress emotionally, and mentally of being over there, but no, he was not physically hurt.
Yeah.
No.
And then that's all the questions I have. But how old was he when he died again?
59.
59. I was 1.
Yeah, you were 10 months.
Yeah. I think that's all I have.
That's it?
I think that's it.
Yep. You were 10 months old when Grandpa died. But